first few words in the Bible? Genesis 1. Anybody got it? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. I love this song. You know, this song is so awesome. It just kind of like lays it out in just kind of like a powerful way. And so in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and then He creates us, right? And we were created to worship. We're created to worship. And yet, often what happens is we begin to worship ourselves. We begin to worship ourselves. We're created to do it for Him, and we wind up doing it for ourselves. It's interesting that in John, the Gospel of John, the first few words are in the beginning. It says this, in the beginning was the Word. That's another way to say Jesus. In the beginning was Jesus. And of course it says, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with Him in the beginning. Through Him all things were made. Without Him nothing was made that has been made. In Him was life, and the light was the light of man. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Today I'm going to have Candice share a testimony with you. She came into my office, I don't know, maybe a couple months ago, after I said, hey, listen, anybody want to give their testimony during this Is He Enough thing? And she's been working here at the daycare and the preschool for, I don't know, quite a while. And I'd heard little bits of her story, but when she shared the whole thing with me, I was like, wow, that's amazing. It's amazing how God can work through things that you just wouldn't see working through. But you'll hear the story today from Candice, how she did become a Christian young in life, and then kind of as a prodigal daughter, maybe wandered off a little bit. And maybe, just like most of us, chase things that really are in the end empty. And try to save things that are broken, and not trusting God fully. Candice, come on up. I found this morning as Candice gets her microphone up. It's Philippians 4:19. It says, and my God will meet all of your needs according to the riches of His glory in Christ Jesus. Do you guys believe that's true? I believe it's true anyway. Candice, I know you're nervous, but she's put this together for you guys in a little slideshow and a testimony, and so give her your love. Yep. Well, let me see it. Hold on.
All right, I'm never really a public speaker, so I kind of typed everything out. But I never really grew up in a church. My parents were Air Force, so we moved around a lot. When we moved to Texas in '93, my stepmom would take all of us, including my dad, to a Catholic church every Sunday morning. Then in high school, I decided to convert to Baptist. And I remember it like it was yesterday. I asked Jesus into my heart and was baptized there. Every Sunday morning, I went to Sunday school and attended the service, and even in the evenings. And on Wednesdays, I would go to youth group and even went to a youth group camp one summer. And I had attended that church for a few years. Then Matthew 26:31, then Jesus said to them, all of you will be made to stumble because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. Sometime in my senior year, the church I had attended fell apart, splitting the church up at the same time my father had an affair. Within a short time, my father had a second affair, a second time, which prompted my stepmom to move out. When all this happening, I had found comfort in party, drugs, and alcohol. I didn't want to deal with the pain. Eventually, my stepmom had moved back in, but it was too late. Okay, 1 Peter 5:8, be sober, be vigilant, because of your advisory the devil walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. When I was 22 and in dental assisting school, I weighed 96 pounds and I met my ex-husband, PJ. I thought the constant calling was a sign of him being sweet, checking up on me. Once I had graduated and started working, I would visit him on the weekends. He lived about 2 hours away, and during the week, 2 or 3 nights, I would go hang out with my friends at the bar. There were times where he would threaten suicide or accuse me of cheating on him. We moved in together, and I ended up pregnant. And that's me on the beach with Paul in my belly. About my 8th month, his brother, his name was Jeremy, moved in with us temporarily. Eventually, PJ had kicked him out, accusing me of cheating on him, even though I was 8 months pregnant. Then he told me we needed to get married, so we needed to get married so when he joined the Marines, the baby and I would have insurance. Later, after being married, I found out that he never really qualified for the Marines because he had a head injury. By that time, I was already married. And in September of 2005, Paul granted us with his presence. There's little Paul. Within 7 months, I was at my wit's end. Paul was, he cried a lot. And I had threatened suicide. And PJ was very into guns, so he handed me a shotgun and told me to go ahead. I didn't take the gun. I heard Paul crying. He was laying on the floor in the living room, so I turned to walk in there to pick him up. And when I picked him up, I heard PJ say, "Put my son down now." And when I turned around, I saw him pointing the shotgun at us. I told him no, and I backed into the front door and held Paul tight and closed my eyes as I heard him cock the gun. I braced my son and I for impact and really thought this was it. But there was no noise, and when I opened my eyes, he was in our bedroom. He came out with a box of his clothes and left. I packed up as much as I could, took Paul, and left to my parents' house. PJ would call, text continuously, telling me, "I'm sorry, please forgive me, it'll never happen again," until I would finally answer. Meanwhile, my family was trying to convince me to press charges, and I had even talked to a detective, but because I was so scared, I ended up withdrawing the charges. And like a fool, I went back shortly after our son turned 1. And Paul idolized his father. In his eyes, PJ could do no wrong. Paul's love for him was so pure, and even though they did have fun together, that does not take away the pain and fear inflicted on him. And here's PJ and Paul laughing and playing around. He had a little car when he turned 2. It was shortly after moving back in with PJ I found out I was pregnant again. And there's Lily in my belly. And everything seemed great, and it was us against the world. And this is what they call the honeymoon phase. And that's where everything seems so perfect, but it doesn't last. My family was devastated, but they knew there was nothing they could do. I was gone, and this time with their grandson. It was not just my life I was risking. One night, when I was about 7 months pregnant with Lily, PJ came home drunk. He started talking crazy about how he would break into his boss's house, tie him to a chair, making him watch PJ rape his wife and then kill her. He would say things like that. He would also say things along the lines of how he would be on the highway and how he could turn the car and stop, and what he could do to the public. He was very detailed on it. I couldn't take it and told him to stop talking. He went ballistic and held me in a headlock, dragging me across our living room. Our son was sleeping in the next room, fortunately did not wake up. And Paul can sleep hard. Nothing wakes him up. PJ finally let go, took a gun, and went outside to our truck that was in our driveway. I tried everything to get him in the house, but he would not leave the truck. I debated on whether or not to get the cops involved. I decided not to. PJ slept in the truck and did not come inside until the early morning. I went and laid with Paul, cuddling with him, feeling my whole world crumble beneath me. At this point, we only had one vehicle, and it was a truck that would only fit 3 people, which limited on the time I would be able to go see my family because we lived 2 hours away from them. And my sister would get upset because we would never visit them. So she ended up giving me a family car that she was no longer going to use. Just gave me the keys one day and said, "Here, I'm giving this to you as long as you come and see us." And I said, "Okay." Then in June 2007, Lily granted us with her presence. There's PJ and Lily. And there's me and Lily. Things appeared great at first, and this seemed to be a reoccurring thing. Paul loved his baby sister, and PJ and I finally seemed to be getting along. And there's Paul giving her a kiss. But then things got worse. He would make comments like, "I pay for the diapers, she has to feed and clean them." He would say that in front of his family and his friends. Lily was a very complicated pregnancy, so when Lily was born, her development was slow, and she was underweight. So he would also tell me things like he would throw a blanket on her and say, "If she's retarded or slow, then I'm going to put her in a trash bag and put her in the dumpster, or I'm leaving," or something. When PJ had gotten a really good job with his brother working for a family-owned plumbing business. But that was, I want to say it was about maybe an hour to 2 hours away from the house. So he would leave super early in the morning and not come home until 10 o'clock at night. And I really didn't think anything of it. One night he came home around 10, like he did every night, except he was different this time. Paul had been sick all day. Lily had been crying. So I was exhausted both mentally and physically. When he had pulled up, I knew the way he pulled up, because the truck wasn't working, he was using my car. I knew he was drunk. So before he walked in the door, I stood up and I thought, "No, this is my car. You don't need to be driving it like that." I stood up and took off my wedding ring and said, "It's over." He lost it and started yelling at me. I went into our bedroom to pick up Paul, and when I turned around, PJ stared into my eyes. He was right in my face. And I can remember this like it was yesterday. He is standing there with that mad look, mad, evil look he had in his eyes once again. The only way to describe it is like a switch went off, and all you see is darkness and hollowness. He was not the same man I once knew. I picked up Paul. So I had Paul right here, and I was holding him, and he took his hands and he grabbed my throat. I tried to pull him off with only one hand, and it was hard to do that, and I could feel the darkness, and I started to lose consciousness. He finally let go and left the room. Crying, scared, and alone, I struggled to put on my flip-flops. The fear that he had inflicted in me was so, like, I was scared he was going to kill me. And I thought, I have to get out of here now. I have to get my kids. I got to get in the car, and I got to go. Because if I don't, he's going to kill me. He came back with a loaded gun this time. I'm going to try not to cry. I knew it was loaded because he never had an unloaded gun in the house. He had even taught me how to use a gun. I remember being 6 months or 7 months pregnant with Lily, and he was teaching me how to load, take the safety off, and aim. He would tell me if I point a gun, I have to aim to kill, because it was my word against a dead man's. He came up to me, and he went to grab my face, and I remember seeing the gun, and I remember seeing the black hole, and he shoved it in my face and basically put it in my mouth. And I tried to cry out, no, please don't, until all I tasted was metal. Paul was still in my arms, and I tried to back away, but he wouldn't let go of me. And as I was moving, Paul's toddler bed didn't have a mattress on it, so it was just made of wood. And so as I moved, I fell over and fell on top of Paul. Paul started to cry. So PJ backed away, dropped the gun on the bed, and walked off. I went to go into the living room so I could leave, and he started yelling at me, calling me a bitch, a whore, whatever you can think of, he said it. And I told him, I'm coming back to get my daughter. And he laughed and told me no. And I said, then I will go to the police station and I will come back with a police officer, but I'm coming back for my daughter. He said, fine. So I went and put Paul in the car, and I walked back in the house, and as I'm picking her up from the playpen and putting her in, he's right in my ear yelling at me, calling me names, saying that the kids would hate me because they would never know their dad, and he had a knife at one point and was holding it to me. And as I went to walk out the door, he asked me, how much money do you have? And I said none, and he laughed and threw $10 at me. I didn't take it. I got in the car with only my kids, what they were wearing, no food, no formula, nothing. And I actually met his grandmother, who we called Nanny, and she gave me $20 so I can get gas and get home to my parents' house. I never looked in the mirror, but I was told about the bruises. I felt so useless. I felt like this black hole was covering me up, and I could not see any way out. I was terrified that he was going to come after me and kill me. I was terrified that if I pressed charges at any point, he would be the type to sit in prison, wait, and plan his next move carefully, having the time to think about it so that he would not get caught. I cried a lot, and I stayed away for days, even weeks. And he would do the same song, same dance, same old story. It starts with, I'm sorry, won't happen again, I promise. This time I didn't respond. And that's when the threats came, that he was going to take the kids away, that I wouldn't see them, that I was a horrible mother, that the kids need their father. I mean, it was just repetitive, anything he could think of. At one point, he told me that he was going to have me admitted to a mental hospital so that the only way for me to see the kids is through a glass window. He'd also tell me how I can't make it without him, how the kids needed him. Finally scared, and fear in domestic violence, fear plays a big role in it. It's easier to leave the relationship. The hard part is staying away. The hard part is continuously to stand your ground and be like, no, I'm not going back to this person. No, I'm not gonna. It's very, especially when the children are involved. But finally scared, I opened the door to communication. For months, every 2 weeks, I would meet him at a hotel, and the kids and I would stay the weekend, and he would, buy them toys. He would take them out to eat. We would go fishing. And one time we were at this hotel, and he went to put his hand on my thigh. And I don't remember how old Lily was, but she was walking at that time. And she came up, and she took his hand, and she moved his hand and said, no. And he picked up my purse, and he threw my purse across the room, and he said that he was going to dig 3 graves. And I thought, I'm 1, Paul's 2, Lily's 3, okay. And this went on for, I want to say, a few years. And then eventually we were on the phone, and he said, I want a paternity test because I don't think Lily is mine. And that did it. That's when I told him, it's over. I'm done. July of 2009, my sister got married, and I went to Vegas. And I took the kids, and all the family went there, and he would get on the phone, and he would accuse my parents of setting me up with somebody, when I'm there for a wedding for like 2 or 3 days, and that's it. He had a good job. He actually had a decent house, and he went from having a good job, a decent house, and the truck to taking off, going to the beach, and living in his truck. And then rooming and shacking up with someone that he worked with. And he had quit his plumbing job, but he worked at a restaurant, and he shacked up with a guy who had 2 dogs. And then told me that I was too good to move in. I was watching a movie one night when he had called, and it's called Enough, as I think Jennifer Lopez in it. It's really, really good. And he asked me what I was watching, and I told him. And he goes, well, don't you get any ideas? So after all that went down, I went to my dad, and I told him, I said, I want to see a lawyer. And the next day, my dad took me and we went to see a lawyer. And then that's when things got even worse, and I didn't even think that was possible. He would call all the time, leaving voicemail, text messages, and I had to document everything. I had learned documentation, it was important. He would get so mean that I ended up having my stepmom listen to the messages or reading the text messages and document it because I couldn't listen to it anymore. That someone who claimed to love you and is the mother of your children, that you can say such horrible things to her. He had threatened to call CPS, and he did. And CPS showed up at my door, and we ended up having to go to the lawyer's office. I had to take my children, and he had told CPS I was bipolar, and I took off with the kids, and he was worried about the kids. He was worried that I was going to beat the kids. He didn't know what kind of living situation they were in. So CPS ended up taking pictures of my kids for proof that I wasn't abusing them. And my dad was pissed. Very, very pissed. I don't blame him. Here is actually a picture of me and the kids living with my parents. Then in November 2009, the day before Thanksgiving, I was granted a protective order. That covered my car, my parents' car. My dad was a professor, so it covered where he worked. It covered my school. My son was in pre-K. It covered his school. It covered everything. So everybody had a copy in their car. And every time he contacted me, I would have to call the police, and the police would come, and my children would be sitting up on the stairs, at the top of the stairs, and they'd be listening to the report. So eventually I changed my number, and then he found my parents' home number, which they've had for over 20 years, would call and leave messages. In December of 2009, I was approached by a recruiter for the Army. He decided he wanted to join the Army, and he needed the kids' information so that they could be covered under insurance even if we get divorced. And my dad was telling me, no, don't do it, don't do it. It'll lock you in with him. In May of 2010, I was granted a divorce. Now, when I went before the judge, I had found out that he wrote the judge a letter, just like with CPS, claiming I was bipolar, that my parents were making me get a divorce, and I mean, just BS after BS. But I was granted the divorce. I worked, I tried really hard, and I stayed away for a while, for a little while at least. Then in September, he had joined the Army, and he was deployed. Then in September of 2011, I packed up and moved to Kansas. I moved on an Army base called Fort Riley in the middle of nowhere, and I burned my last bridge. My parents couldn't take it anymore and told me I was not allowed to go back again, to move back in. And that was hard. And PJ was overseas when we moved. And then he returned that November. And we didn't last 6 months. And I like this TV show. I don't know if anybody watches it. It's called Criminal Minds. And PJ hated cop shows. And one day when we were on the phone before November, he had told me, he had asked me what I was watching, and I told him. And he told me that he doesn't mind if I watch that show because it is about people like him. And if you know the show, then you know what I mean. The show is about the BAU, Behavior Analysis Unit, catching serial killers, but they actually go into the mind of why the serial killer is. He's told me he was diagnosed a psychopath at one point. Then he would fight with me. Once he returned, it was okay. We would fight, but it wasn't that bad. And then he would fight with me until I would leave. And we had gotten into this one argument, and I remember he told me, he said he was going to shoot himself. And I grabbed a knife from the kitchen, and I said, okay, I'll go ahead and help you. That was it. I had enough with his threats and with his abuse. I was at a friend's house, and he called me saying that he was going to burn the house with the kids inside. So I raced home, and I ended up crashing my car, and it was on base. And I totaled my car and ended up in the hospital. He didn't even come pick me up. Instead, he brought the kids to see me. The nurses gave the kids popsicles, and he threw them away in front of the staff. When I got home, he had greeted me at the door, but not in a good way. I had, and my grandma had passed, but I had like a china set, tea set that she had bought me a long, long time ago, and it was destroyed. The house was a mess. There was books everywhere. He had went through the house and was just throwing stuff apparently when I wasn't there. He put his hands on my throat again, and I remember it like it was yesterday. The thought and the feeling. This is it. Not today. I'm not dying today, or I am at least going to die trying. I remember getting that angry, and I've never fought back. In the 8 years I was with him, I never fought back with him. But this time I did. I had kicked him, and that sent him running up the stairs to our bedroom, locking himself in there. I banged on the door, telling him to get his ass out. Paul and Lily came out of their rooms, and I told them to go next door, because where we lived, it was the duplexes. That is when everything goes dark. So I don't really remember exactly what happened, but I woke up to his boss looking at me as I laid on the floor in the storm shelter. And I felt like crap. And apparently he had beat the crap out of me and went to work and bragged about killing me and the kids. The military police detained him, and my family was already on the way to get us. When my brother and his friend arrived on base, we had packed the truck with what we could. The MPs warned us that they had to let him go. So we got in the truck and drove off, heading to Texas for a few days. Then I was getting on a plane to Maryland. My mother and her husband lived in Maryland. I guess this was everyone's last resort. Get me out of the state as far away from him as possible. We all knew when he would get out of the Army, he would go back to Texas. When my kids and I landed in Maryland, this is where things continued to get tough. PJ did not let up. And when I would tell him, I need the kids' shot records, or I need the kids' birth certificates to enroll them in school, all I got was, no, you can come get them. I would ask him to send my driver's license. I got the same response. My stepfather taught me that I did not need him to get those documents. I had researched, called, and finally got the documents except my birth certificate. Being an Air Force baby, this seemed harder to get a copy of. Once PJ realized that I found other ways to, once PJ realized that he made other attempts to get back to me. He had bought a truck when we were living together, and I really, really loved the truck. So he would tell me that the title was on the end sofa cushion, and if I wanted it, I could come get it. I felt hesitant because this, to me, seemed like a trap. He was setting me up to ambush me. There was no telling if I walked in the door that he was going to stand there with a gun and open fire on me. And it was a gut feeling, so I let it go. When I wrecked my car, I had totaled the car. And I was in contact with the insurance company. And one day, I received a call from the insurance guy, and he had asked me, "Did you sell PJ the car?" And I told him, "No, why?" He had told me that PJ had signed my name on the title and said that I sold him the car. I explained how I did not want PJ to find out that I was getting the money. The guy assured me not to worry and I would receive the money. It was another attempt for PJ to try to control me even though I was miles away. To help me through this, I visited a Baptist church close to my mother's house. I changed my number and cut off all contact with PJ. And it was one of those things where it kind of just happened. I didn't have to force myself. It just happened naturally. I would attend Sunday service and Sunday school. I had to rebuild myself to help my children. And just because I had left doesn't mean that the kids and I were affected. I mean, we still, and even to this day, we still have issues. My kids had nightmares of PJ finding us and killing us. There were things that I found out later. PJ would drill them over and over that if we moved, he would find us and kill me in front of them before killing them. This is the place where my mom and my stepdad had taught me that I can survive on my own. They helped me find a job, get help from the government, and I moved into my own apartment where I bought my first couch, dresser, and dinner table. Microwave and utensils, everything. I was very, very excited. But things were still hard. I worked a lot and had no money. Christmas time came, and I could not afford to buy wrapping paper or presents for the kids. In fact, my dad and my stepmom had bought presents. So Christmas Day, the kids would come out, and the presents weren't even wrapped. And none were from me because I had no money. I couldn't even afford the electric bill. I didn't want to get child support from him. I met my future husband, Jason, who knew all of my baggage, and he accepted me and my kids. The funny part was Jason lived in Ohio, and I was currently in Maryland. Well, with me living here in Ohio, we all know how that ended. I left Maryland and moved in with Jason, who after a few years proposed. Paul struggled with this the most. He always seemed to expect Jason to leave. He doesn't call Jason Dad to his face. He will call him by his name, and he doesn't tell him, "I love you," even when Jason says it first. Jason will tell him, "I love you, buddy," and he'll say, "I know." And one day, Jason asked me, "Paul's funny, he doesn't respond to 'I love you' for me." And I told him, "You know what he calls you when he's talking about you, don't you?" And his response was, "What?" I told Jason, "He calls you stepdad." PJ has put an image of what a dad is in his head, and it's a horrible image. It's not a good person. So Paul won't put you in the category of a father, but he'll put you as stepfather. And Jason continues to tell Paul he loves him and calls him his son, and he's being very, very patient with him. He knows what Paul has been through. Lily adjusted well. She has Jason wrapped around her little finger. Much better. I am here today, alive, married with my 2 kids. And here are some current pictures of our lives today. This is me and my current husband. Me and my son, Paul. And me and my daughter, Lily, at a football game. She was a cheerleader, and I coached her squad. And that's my husband with Paul and Lily. That's a father-daughter dance that he took her to. And that's Paul and Jason being silly. And there's Paul and Lily. And there were many times I should have died, but didn't. I had a friend in high school who never talked about her dad. The only thing she said was, "I have seen the look in the devil's eyes." Now, after what my kids and I have been through, I understand what she meant. Lily used to stop and cry when she thought she saw him. So we would be walking through Kroger's, and in the produce section, she would see somebody that had a resemblance look of PJ, and she would just start bawling. And I'd have to stop what I was doing, get down on her eye level, give her a hug, and comfort her. She doesn't do that anymore. Paul, on the other hand, has been affected the most. He had idolized PJ for years until PJ turned on him. And I didn't realize that I kept the abuse hidden so well from Paul. But in Kansas, PJ would do things like he would take a kitchen knife and he would put ketchup on it as blood to scare him. Paul was 6. He would destroy their toys, he would call them names, he would threaten them, and he even and I found this out I think it was like 2 years after, he attempted to sexually assault Paul. Really, really upset me. I have created a safe word for Paul whenever he feels threatened. If he sees anybody that looks like him, that looks close to PJ, he can't be around. It hurts him, it scares him, it makes him really, really mad. This little boy who had what he thought was a wonderful father figure learned he was truly a monster. And sometimes they still have nightmares, and sometimes I do too. And we've had to hide and shut down our internet accounts. We had to change passwords, change our route. It's been over 6 years, and I can still feel his hands on my neck. I will not wear turtlenecks or scarves wrapped around my neck. I can't have anything touching my neck, even T-shirts. If I have a T-shirt up here, I pull continuously on it. Through all of that, God was still there waiting patiently for me, never once giving up or losing hope. Instead, he showed me the impossible. When I had only me and my kids, he was there. When I had to leave Kansas and start over in Maryland, left Texas, the state I loved and grew up, where all my friends were, I found church giving me strength to say goodbye to old bad memories and stand up on my own with my 2 kids. The church I found in Maryland set such a high standard and helped me when I needed it. When I moved to Ohio, it took years to find a church that met that standard. And I have finally found it here at Harvest Christian, a place that is new but can feel so familiar. So when asked if God is enough, he is. He was enough for me, even when I walked away from him and did things on my own way.
Thank you for being so transparent. I'm sure that there's no one in the room thinks that was easy, right?